Have you ever wondered if giving too much to your children could come back to haunt you in your later years? As parents, we often pour our love, time, and resources into raising our children, believing it will lead to a happy, secure old age. But what happens when that sacrifice leaves us unprepared for our future? In today's video, we'll dive into the story of Mr. Tanaka, a parent who thought he did everything right, but ended up facing a harsh reality in his later years. We'll explore the painful lessons learned from dedicating too much to children without thinking about personal well-being. Stay with us as we uncover why many parents, despite their best intentions, find themselves regretting how they raise their children and how you can avoid the same pitfalls. By the end of this video, you will discover essential strategies to prepare for old age, maintain your independence, and ensure you're not left vulnerable when life takes unexpected turns. This is a wake-up call you won't want to miss. Your future might depend on it. If you are not subscribed, I recommend subscribing and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support means a lot to me. And if you enjoyed this video, you can help me continue spreading the valuable lessons by liking and sharing it. If you like the topic of this video, please comment 1. If you don't, please comment 0 to let me know how I can improve and make better videos for you. Now, let's begin. Kenichi paused for a few moments before responding, and in those few seconds, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he would say something different, something reassuring. But his voice, when it finally came through the phone, was distant, cold even. I'm swamped with work and can only take calls during bathroom breaks. Taking time off right now is nearly impossible, he said as if he were talking about something as casual as the weather. Then, without any sign of hesitation or emotion, he added, "Take your father to a hospital in Tokyo. Hire a caregiver if necessary. Don't worry about the money." And just like that, he hung up. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand as if it had suddenly turned into something foreign, something I didn't know how to use. My heart sank. How could he have hung up so easily, with so little concern? I was left with no clear plan, and a tidal wave of emotions crashing down on me. I had never felt so helpless. How was I supposed to figure out something as simple as buying a high-speed train ticket for an elderly person when I was already drowning in anxiety? My hands shook as I tried calling Kenichi back, desperate for some guidance, some reassurance. But the phone just rang and rang, with no answer. The silence on the other end of the line felt like a chasm, growing wider with every unanswered ring. Fear began to creep in, slowly at first, then all at once. What if something happened to Mr. Tanaka? His health was deteriorating, and the thought of not being able to help him tore at my heart. I didn't know what else to do, so I rushed to my neighbor, hoping she could offer some advice. With a kind smile, she suggested I visit Aku, who might know how to buy a ticket to Tokyo. I hurried to Aku's house, sweat dripping down my face, my heart pounding in my chest. Every step felt heavier than the last, burdened by worry and frustration. By the time I reached his door, I must have looked like a mess. Aku took one look at me, wide-eyed, and immediately sensed that something was wrong. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I explained the situation as best I could, though my words were coming out jumbled and rushed. He listened patiently, then gently said, "Next time something like this happens, please just call me. I'll buy the ticket for you. There's no need for you to rush over here like this." His voice was calming, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside of me. With a few swipes on his smartphone, he began looking up tickets. As he worked, he casually asked, "Why are you going to Tokyo anyway?" His question caught me off guard. I hadn't fully processed everything myself, So my answer came out vague. Mr. Tanaka's condition isn't great, I muttered, my voice barely audible. I explained, almost as if I was convincing myself, that we needed to take him to a larger hospital in Tokyo because the local one wasn't enough. Aka stopped what he was doing, his face serious now. You need to go soon. How are your aunt and uncle doing? He asked, concern laced in his words. He paused, then canceled the ticket he had been buying. I'm about to get some time off, he said firmly. I'll drive you and Mr. Tanaka to Tokyo myself. His words hung in the air for a moment before sinking in. My face flushed with embarrassment. I didn't want to be a burden, and I tried to refuse, but he wouldn't hear of it. Please don't say that, he said gently but firmly. It's too dangerous for you to go on your own, especially with Mr. Tanaka's condition. If something happens on the way, my mom will scold me for not helping. He smiled as he said this, but there was an undertone of seriousness. His insistence was a kindness I wasn't sure how to accept. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment one below to let me know that you are still here with me. Aka drove us home that day. But once we were back, the weight of everything finally came crashing down on me. The moment he left, I bolted into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I sat on the cold floor, my hands trembling as I tried to hold back the tears. But it was no use. The dam broke, and I cried, silent, heart-wrenching sobs that I didn't dare let out for fear that Mr. Tanaka would hear. I cried for everything. For the helplessness I felt, for the weight of responsibility that seemed too heavy to bear, for the distant son who seemed to have slipped away from us, and for the fear that I might lose Mr. Tanaka, too. It was the kind of crying that shook your whole body, where every tear felt like a release of years of pent-up emotions. When I finally pulled myself together and emerged from the bathroom, Mr. Tanaka was waiting. His eyes, tired and heavy, met mine. What did Kenichi say? He asked quietly, his voice filled with an unspoken hope that maybe, somehow, his son had shown a flicker of the compassion he once knew. I swallowed hard and relayed what Kenichi had said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Mr. Tanaka sighed, a deep, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of disappointment and regret. He didn't say anything else, but he didn't need to. I understood what he was feeling, because I felt it too. In that moment, we both knew that we had raised our son too well, too perfectly, and that somehow, in the process, we had lost something irreplaceable. Kenichi had always been exceptional. Even as a child, he stood out not just to us, but to everyone around him. The adults in the neighborhood spoke of him with admiration, often singling him out as a shining example of success. His peers, on the other hand, saw him as a rival. He was always at the top of his class, always excelling, and we couldn't have been prouder. As teachers ourselves, Mr. Tanaka and I knew the importance of education, so we spared no expense when it came to Kenichi's future. We poured everything we had into ensuring that he had the best opportunities: elite cram schools, private tutors, and special classes. We sheltered him from any distractions, including household chores, thinking that we were doing what was best for him. And Kenichi never disappointed us. He consistently brought home top grades, earned a place at one of the most prestigious universities in the country, studied abroad, and eventually landed a high-paying job that made him the envy of everyone around us. During those years, our pride in him knew no bounds. We were often invited by schools to speak about our parenting techniques, and influential figures would visit our home just to praise Kenichi. They called him a treasure, and we basked in that glory, convinced that we had done everything right. But as time went on, and the conversations around us began to shift from academic achievements to things like marriage and grandchildren, I started to feel an unsettling shift. After Kenichi graduated, he moved to Germany, and though we supported him financially to buy a house, it felt like he was slipping further and further away. We sold our home in the city and moved back to the village, where people would joke, "Looks like you'll be spending your old age in Germany." I would smile politely, but deep down, I was starting to realize that perhaps that dream wasn't as close as I had once thought. We encouraged Kenichi to get married, and for years we waited, thinking that it was only a matter of time. But when we finally found out that he had been married for 2 years already, and that his wife was pregnant, the news hit me like a physical blow. How could he have kept something so important from us? I was angry, but more than that, I was hurt. It felt like we had become strangers to our son. We had sacrificed so much to ensure his success, but in doing so, had we unknowingly built a wall between us? At that moment, I felt the full weight of what we had lost. Kenichi had become everything we had hoped for, and yet he was no longer the boy we had once known. We had raised him to be exceptional, but in the process, we had forgotten to nurture the most important thing, our connection as a family. Now, that connection seemed like a distant memory, something we could never get back, no matter how successful he had become. Kenichi refused my offer to help, dismissing my concerns with a tone that was both calm and firm. "We can manage on our own, Mom," he said, almost as if my worries were outdated or misplaced. Despite his reassurances, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling inside me. Yumi was pregnant, and I feared that if I didn't step in, I might be resented later. I had heard too many stories from other mothers about how young women these days harbor bitterness if they aren't supported during pregnancy and the postpartum period. They say that if their parents don't help them during those crucial times, they won't be inclined to care for them in old age. That fear gnawed at me, but Kenichi only laughed and brushed off my worries, telling me that it's not that kind of era anymore. He insisted that if they needed anything, they would ask for it themselves, but deep down, I still couldn't shake the feeling of being left out. When our granddaughter was born, Yumi and Mr. Tanaka went to Germany to visit. But within just 2 weeks, Mr. Tanaka returned to Japan, unable to adapt to the new environment. He told me how strange everything felt, how different it was from home, and I could sense the discomfort in his voice. I stayed behind to help care for our granddaughter, eager to support Kenichi and Yumi in any way I could. But I quickly realized that Kenichi's salary, which was considered high back in Japan, didn't go as far in Germany. The cost of living there was much higher than I had imagined. Yumi, who had initially been warm and polite, seemed to maintain a distance, even though we lived under the same roof. I could sense it, an invisible wall between us, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. One afternoon, while trying to be helpful, I went into Kenichi's room to clean. I thought it was a small gesture, something a mother would naturally do. But Yumi saw me and immediately snapped. "Please respect our privacy." Her words hit me like a cold wind, leaving me feeling embarrassed and unwelcome. It stung, but I tried to shrug it off, telling myself that maybe I had overstepped. When our granddaughter was only 2 months old, Yumi stopped breastfeeding. I suggested gently that she might consider continuing a bit longer, thinking it was just motherly advice. But Yumi retorted sharply, "No one should interfere with my body," and her mood darkened. Her reaction caught me off guard. Although Yumi was Japanese, there were moments when she and Kenichi would speak in English around me, as if to keep me out of their conversations. It was during these times that I felt most like a stranger in their home, alienated by their discussions about freedom and human rights. I didn't understand it fully, but it made me feel like I was living in a completely different world. Every day in Germany was filled with anxiety. I constantly feared that I might say or do something wrong, that I might unintentionally cross a line with Yumi. I was always walking on eggshells, careful not to make any missteps, but it was exhausting. When our granddaughter turned 2, Yumi enrolled her in an early education institution and, with a formal tone, thanked me for my help. "Thank you very much," she said, and that was it. I was sent back to Japan, no longer needed. The goodbye felt distant, almost transactional, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief mixed with sadness. After that, whenever neighbors would ask when we would move to Germany to spend our old age there, my husband and I would only laugh and give vague answers. The truth was, our son and his family had fully embraced their life abroad, and it was clear that we were no longer part of their world. Blending into their lives had become impossible. There was a time when we helped Kenichi with our pension, always eager to support his ambitions. But as the years passed, we shifted our focus to ourselves, using our money for our living expenses. We traveled twice a year, played shogi with our friends, went fishing, and even took up dancing. It was a peaceful life in its way, and I found a small sense of happiness when I noticed how some elderly neighbors, busy caring for their grandchildren, looked at us with a hint of envy. We didn't have that same burden. More than 10 years flew by in the blink of an eye. Kenichi had only returned to Japan twice in all those years, each visit short, almost like a brief vacation. Yumi and our granddaughter, however, never came back. At the time, I convinced myself that it was fine. It was good. I told myself that Kenichi had built a successful life abroad. He had found his freedom, his path, and we couldn't cling to him, couldn't deprive him of that. But now, as Mr. Tanaka's health worsened, I was gripped with anxiety. What would happen to me if Mr. Tanaka were to pass away? How would I cope with being alone? The fear of that future settled deep in my bones, leaving me feeling more vulnerable than I ever had before. When Aku offered to take us to Tokyo, I was beyond grateful. Kenichi took care of the hotel reservations and the hospital procedures, and even picked up the medicine. I was truly thankful to have him there, but I couldn't help feeling a sense of inadequacy. Just standing outside the hospital, watching the crowds of people bustle about, gave me a headache. I couldn't have managed the online reservations or the payments with the smart devices everyone seemed to rely on now. The world had become so advanced and so efficient, but for someone nearing 70 like me, it was a world that felt increasingly unfriendly. The test results confirmed our worst fears. Mr. Tanaka was in the terminal stage of liver cancer. My heart shattered, and I couldn't hold back the tears. But I made sure to cry in secret, away from Mr. Tanaka's sight. He didn't need to see my pain. He had enough to deal with. After my tears had dried, I picked up the phone and called Kenichi. He took a day off and came back once, staying for 3 days. But soon enough, he left again, buried under the weight of his work. Before leaving, he said the same words that had become a refrain: "I'm busy with work, but don't worry about the money." His words pierced through me. I bit my lip, fighting back the surge of emotions that rose in my throat. As soon as he left, I found myself alone, crying again, but this time out of frustration and anger. Money. It was always about money. Did Kenichi believe that money could solve everything? Could it ease the pain of watching his father slowly slip away? Could it buy back the years we had lost? The time we had sacrificed for his success? No amount of money in the world could change the fact that we were losing Mr. Tanaka, and no amount of money could fill the void that had grown between us and our son. Mr. Tanaka underwent radiation and chemotherapy, but the treatments ravaged his body, leaving him a frail shell of his former self, reduced to little more than bones and fragile health. Each session drained him further, both physically and financially, until the doctor, with a somber expression, said words that shattered my heart. "There's no point in continuing treatment. Please, let him enjoy the food he craves, fulfill what he wishes to do, and cherish the time he has left." Those words lingered in the air, heavy with finality. I sat by Mr. Tanaka's side, holding his hand as if my grip could tether him to this world for a little longer. His fingers tightened around mine, and I could see the effort it took for him to speak. His once strong, commanding voice was now a mere whisper, and even that seemed like it was slipping away from him. I leaned in closer, barely catching his frail words. "What will you do from now on? I'm worried." My heart clenched, feeling like it was being torn in two. The love of my life, the person who had stood by me through everything, was now more concerned about my future than his looming mortality. It was a sorrow I couldn't fully express, a sadness so deep that it felt like drowning. When I was younger, all my energy was poured into raising our son, Kenichi. I had thought that he would be the one to stand by me, that his success would mean we would never be alone. But as the years passed, I realized something that broke my heart differently. Mr. Tanaka, not Kenichi, had been the one to walk with me through life. He was my constant, my rock, the one who stayed when our son soared far away. Now, that rock was crumbling before my eyes, and I was left wondering how I could carry on without him. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. I decided to take Mr. Tanaka back to our hometown hospital, hoping the familiar surroundings would bring him some comfort. I called Kenichi to inform him of his father's condition, and for the first time in a long while, Kenichi rushed home by plane. When Mr. Tanaka saw his son walk into the room, tears welled up in his cloudy, tired eyes. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was press his lips together and look at Kenichi with a longing that words couldn't convey. But after just 2 days, Kenichi's restlessness became apparent. He was constantly on his phone, taking call after call, pacing the room. On the 3rd morning, he said he had to leave. Work was calling him back. I couldn't hold back the tidal wave of anger that surged up inside me. I exploded, shouting through my tears. "You wish your father would go quickly in these 2 days, didn't you? Otherwise, you wouldn't have come all this way. Is earning money that important to you? Do you value money more than your father?" My voice cracked under the weight of my emotions. I had never felt such fury, such deep regret. How had we raised our son to be like this? How had I allowed my child to become so distant, so incapable of supporting his parents in their time of need? Kenichi looked at me, his face filled with confusion and hurt. "Mom, I'm struggling too," he said quietly, his voice almost pleading. But those words did nothing to ease my pain. I cried harder, feeling the full weight of my mistakes. I had pushed my son to excel, to reach heights we had dreamed for him, but in doing so, I had lost him. I had raised him too high, and now he was unreachable. After Kenichi left, I became terrified to leave Mr. Tanaka's side, even though the nurses were there with me. I couldn't shake the fear that if I looked away for even a moment, he might disappear forever. My family members, bless them, stayed by my side, taking turns watching over Mr. Tanaka through the night. They had their own lives and their businesses to run and needed to keep their stores open to earn their daily income. Yet they were here, sacrificing their time for me, for Mr. Tanaka. I was overwhelmed with gratitude, and when I tried to offer them money as a token of thanks, they refused, telling me it was their duty as family. I felt humbled, remembering how my parents had once said these family members were useless. Now, I wish my son was more like them. At least if someone had been with Mr. Tanaka in his final moments, I could have felt less alone and less afraid of what was to come. But in the end, the person who survives is always the one who suffers the most. Mr. Tanaka passed away a few days later, at 3 a.m. In his final moments, he found a brief surge of strength and kept looking toward the door, hoping, praying that his son would walk through it. But Kenichi never came. His hope, that last desperate wish, went unfulfilled. When he finally slipped away, a strange numbness washed over me. I didn't feel the crushing sorrow I had expected. Somewhere deep down, I had already accepted this moment and had prepared myself for the inevitable. Yet, as I prepared for his funeral, I felt a coldness settle over my heart, especially when Kenichi returned to Japan once more without Yumi or our granddaughter. Their absence felt like an icicle piercing through my chest, a reminder of just how far apart we had grown. After the funeral, I buried Mr. Tanaka's ashes in the family cemetery, a quiet final resting place. Kenichi expressed his gratitude to my sister's family for their help, but he said nothing about our future, about what would happen to me now that Mr. Tanaka was gone. It was as if my existence, my needs, were an afterthought. That night, as we gathered for a family meal, Kenichi finally, after much hesitation, brought up the topic I had been dreading. With a troubled expression, he explained how difficult it was to manage finances and housing abroad, how the pressures of living in a foreign country were weighing on him. Then, casually, he mentioned that he would like to leave the responsibility of caring for me in my old age to his younger brothers. The shock of his words hit me like a blow to the chest. How could he be so irresponsible, so thoughtless? In just a few sentences, he had passed the burden of our care on to others, as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. After Kenichi left, I visited Mr. Tanaka's grave, talking to him quietly, confessing my envy that he had left this world before me. At least he had escaped the loneliness that was now swallowing me whole. Sometimes, death isn't the scariest thing. It's surviving. It's being left behind to deal with the pain and the emptiness. That's the real suffering. My sister, who had passed away years ago, had once invited me to live with her, and after Mr. Tanaka's death, I moved into her home. Together, we managed our daily lives, and on weekends, our relatives would visit with their wives and children. The house was always filled with laughter and warmth, the sound of children running around and playing. It was heartwarming, a kind of solace I hadn't realized I needed. I loved the liveliness of it all, and every time I saw my grandchildren, I would slip them some pocket money, watching their faces light up with joy. I had my pension and insurance, so money was never an issue. I rarely spent much at all. Money, once so important, had become something almost irrelevant, a mere formality. What I feared most now wasn't running out of money. It was the crushing loneliness that came with aging. This lifestyle continued for several years, but then, just as I had feared, my sister fell ill. Despite my hopes, she passed away too, leaving me to face the world without her. Kenichi returned to Japan with his family for the funeral, but my granddaughter, now grown up, was almost unrecognizable. She dressed fashionably, spoke fluent English, and seemed completely out of place in the rural setting of our home. We couldn't connect. I felt like a stranger in my own family, unsure of how to bridge the gap that had grown between us. All I could do was offer her food, suggesting she try this or that, though the conversation felt formal and distant. Yumi, her mother, prepared most of the food, but I made sure to cook the eggs Kenichi liked, a small act of love in a world that had grown so cold. As I sat there, Watching my son and his family, I realized just how much time had passed and how far we had all drifted. The loneliness I had feared for so long was no longer just a possibility. It was my reality. When our granddaughter reached for the boiled eggs that I had lovingly prepared, eggs that Kenichi used to enjoy as a child, Yumi's reaction was swift and harsh. She shot her daughter a sharp look, slapped her hand hard, and without warning, slapped me too. My heart shriveled in that instant, as if it had been pierced by invisible thorns. It was clear to me then, more than ever, that Yumi resented me. She despised not only my cooking, but perhaps everything I represented. The traditions, the care, the very essence of my motherhood. That night, still reeling from the shock of Yumi's slap, I couldn't contain my unease. I approached Kenichi with hesitation, my voice carrying the weight of years of silent suffering. Kenichi, when your father passed away, neither Yumi nor the children came back. Why is it that your son came so quickly to see me when you passed? My heart was filled with doubt, aching for some explanation, some reassurance that my family still cared for me. Kenichi awkwardly answered, "There were special circumstances back then, Mom. Yumi had just suffered a miscarriage, and traveling was difficult for her. But over the years, Kenichi and the others have helped me. They've always treated me well." His words felt like a small balm on my heart, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that my son still cared, and that perhaps all wasn't lost. Kenichi stayed longer this time than during his previous visits, but I noticed something peculiar. He and his family were staying in a hotel in the city, far from our home. Despite his presence, meeting him was difficult. Rumors were circulating in the village. Whispers that old homes were being evacuated and that my house was included in the area marked for demolition. The compensation for such an evacuation, considering the size of our home and the sprawling backyard, would be considerable. At first, I was overwhelmed by the news. It felt like an unexpected stroke of luck, something that could finally bring some relief after all the hardship. Eager to confirm, I rushed to the village office, where the village chief greeted me warmly. "Of course, it's true. The documents have already been processed. We just haven't made an official announcement yet, because we're still working out the details. But don't worry, it'll happen soon," he assured me with a cheerful smile. I even told Kenichi about this a while back. Hearing those words, it was as if my world had shifted. I felt as though my feet had left the ground, floating in a daze. Kenichi had known. He had known about the compensation all along, even before his father's funeral. And it dawned on me with painful clarity that his visit wasn't about honoring his father's memory. It was about securing the compensation. A week later, the eviction notice arrived. Kenichi, barely able to contain his excitement, came with his family to discuss the compensation. He eagerly asked for my thoughts, and I responded, based on the size of the house, "You can get enough for 3 properties." For a fleeting moment, Kenichi's face tightened, as if he hadn't expected me to know the full extent of the compensation. I caught his sideways glance, and before he could speak, I said, "I don't need money, Kenichi. I want a house. You're already old yourself. Money can run out, but a home, that's security." I had thought about this long and hard. I planned to keep one house for myself and rent out the other 2 for a steady income. It seemed like a practical way to live out my remaining years without depending on anyone. Kenichi, however, looked uncomfortable, shrugging his shoulders and offering a weak, forced smile. He began talking about a project he was involved in, explaining how he was short on funds and wanted to invest. Then came the bold request. He asked if I could give him the compensation in cash instead of using it to buy houses. Although I had prepared myself for something like this, hearing him ask so directly still hurt. It felt as if all the years of love and sacrifice had come down to this moment. A request for money, nothing more. I looked at him with sadness in my eyes and replied, "Kenichi, your father and I raised you, no matter how hard it was. We made sure you never suffered, hoping that one day, when you succeeded, we could feel that we could rely on you in our old age. But your father couldn't depend on you in his final moments. When he needed you the most, neither your wife nor children came. Since then, it's been my relatives who have stood by me. But you never thought about taking care of me, not once. Now, here you are, asking for money. Isn't that shameful?" Kenichi's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected me to confront him so directly. Yumi, sitting nearby, frowned deeply and, in a fit of anger, grabbed our granddaughter and stormed out of the room. I didn't care about their departure. I felt an immense sense of relief after finally saying the words that had been festering inside me for so long. My heart, once warm and full of hope for my son, had grown cold from his indifference. I had once believed that by moving abroad, Kenichi had adopted new customs and new ways of thinking. But now I realized it wasn't just his environment that had changed. His very core had become selfish and uncaring. Kenichi had distanced himself from us, using words like freedom and human rights to justify his choices, yet when he needed money or support, he expected us to adhere to traditional values and to be the parents who always provided. It wasn't his life abroad that had changed him. It was his own rotten character. I deeply regretted the years I spent focusing solely on his academic achievements, neglecting to nurture his heart and his sense of responsibility toward his family. After Kenichi left, I stayed close to Mr. Tanaka, terrified to leave his side for even a moment. The fear that he would slip away while I wasn't looking consumed me. My relatives, bless their hearts, took turns sitting with him, staying all night to make sure I wouldn't fall ill from exhaustion. They had their businesses and their own lives to manage, yet they sacrificed their time for me and Mr. Tanaka. When I tried to offer them money as a token of my gratitude, they refused. "It's our duty as family," they said. At that moment, I remembered how my parents had once dismissed these same relatives as useless. Now, I wish my son could be just as useless. At least they were here, spending the final moments with Mr. Tanaka, providing me with the comfort I so desperately needed. But the truth remained. The one who survives is always the one who suffers the most. Mr. Tanaka passed away a few days later. At 3 a.m., in his last moments, he found a brief surge of energy. Turning his gaze toward the door, his cloudy eyes filled with hope that his son would walk through one last time. But Kenichi never came. His hope went unfulfilled, and he passed away quietly with me by his side. Strangely, I didn't feel overwhelming sadness. Somewhere deep in my heart, I had already come to terms with his death and had already accepted that this was how it would end. Kenichi returned to Japan for the funeral, but once again Yumi and our granddaughter didn't come. Their absence felt like a final nail in the coffin of our relationship. After the funeral, we buried Mr. Tanaka's ashes, and as I stood there, I couldn't help but feel a deep, bitter sense of regret. Not just for the loss of my husband, but for the son who had slipped away from me long ago. My heart, once so full of warmth, had grown cold, and I realized that the only thing left for me now was to live out my days in solitude, finding peace where I could, in the memories of those who had loved me, and in the moments when I had truly loved in return. As we prepared for Mr. Tanaka's funeral, Kenichi returned to Japan once again, but Yumi and our granddaughter remained absent, not even offering a word of condolence. My heart, already burdened with grief, froze over once more at the coldness of it all. Their absence felt like a slap in the face, a stark reminder of how distant we had become. After the funeral, I took Mr. Tanaka's ashes to the cemetery, laying him to rest in the soil of our hometown. It was a small comfort, knowing that at least he was home. Kenichi expressed his gratitude to my sister's family, thanking them for taking care of his parents. But not a word was spoken about our future, about what would happen to me now that I was alone. That evening, as we gathered for a family meal, Kenichi finally spoke, though I could see the discomfort in his eyes. His face was clouded with concern as he broached the topic I had been dreading. He explained how difficult life abroad had become, and how managing finances and housing was more challenging than we could imagine. Then, in a single careless sentence, he suggested that the responsibility for my care and well-being in my old age should be left to his younger brothers. I was stunned. How could my son, the one I had raised with such care, so easily shift the responsibility of his aging parents to someone else, with no thought to the burden he was placing on them? I was left speechless, hurt by his irresponsibility. How could he speak of me, of us, as if we were an obligation to be passed off to others? He had already distanced himself from us emotionally, but now it seemed like he was severing the last ties that bound us together. After Kenichi left, I found myself visiting Mr. Tanaka's grave more frequently, seeking comfort in the silent conversations I had with him. I envied him, in a way, for having left before me. At least I had been there to hold his hand, to witness his final moments with love and dignity. Sometimes, death feels like a release, an escape from the loneliness and sorrow that linger after loss. It's those of us who survive that carry the weight of suffering. In the months following, I moved in with my sister, who had also lost her husband. Together, we tried to fill the emptiness by leaning on each other. We managed our daily lives in quiet companionship, but on weekends, our relatives would visit, filling the house with laughter, warmth, and the sounds of children running through the halls. Those moments were like small flickers of light in the darkness, and I cherished them. I found joy in giving my grandchildren small gifts of pocket money whenever they visited, watching their eyes light up with excitement. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. For a time, life felt manageable. I had my pension, social insurance, and long-term illness coverage, so I rarely worried about money. It was a strange sensation, almost as though money had lost its significance, something chewable, easy to handle. What I feared most as I aged wasn't poverty, but the loneliness that came creeping in when the laughter faded and the house grew quiet once more. This life, though modest, was enough to keep that fear at bay for several years. But then my sister fell ill. Her decline was swift, and soon enough, she too passed away, leaving me alone again, this time without my closest companion. Kenichi returned to Japan for her funeral, bringing Yumi and our granddaughter with him. But as I saw them enter, I barely recognized the child I once cradled in my arms. Our granddaughter had grown into a young woman, dressing fashionably and speaking fluent English, but she seemed completely disconnected from the world she had once known. The rural scenery of our home felt foreign to her, and the distance between us was palpable. We could barely hold a conversation, and when I offered her food, it was in a formal, stilted manner, as if I didn't know how to reach her anymore. Yumi, as usual, prepared most of the meal, but I made sure to cook the boiled eggs Kenichi used to love. It was my small, quiet way of showing that despite everything, I still cared. When our granddaughter reached for those eggs, something snapped. Yumi shot her a cold look, slapped her hand away, and then, to my shock, slapped me as well. At that moment, My heart shriveled. It was a clear, painful message. Yumi not only disliked my cooking, she resented my very presence. Later that night, still nursing the sting of Yumi's slap, I spoke to Kenichi with lingering doubts in my heart. When your father died, Yumi and the children didn't come back. Why did your son come so quickly to see me when you passed away? I asked, hoping for some explanation, some reassurance that would ease my troubled mind. Kenichi, looking uncomfortable, replied, "There were special circumstances, Mom. Yumi had a miscarriage at the time, and it was hard to travel. But over the years, they've been good to me. They've always treated me well." His words offered a small sliver of relief, but a part of me still felt the weight of their absence. It was clear that my son still cared for us, but the connection felt so fragile, so distant. Kenichi stayed longer than usual this time, but his family remained at a hotel in the city, making it difficult for us to see each other. I had heard rumors circulating through the village. Whispers at old homes, including mine, were going to be evacuated. The compensation for such an eviction, given the size of my house and the expansive backyard, would be significant. Curiosity and hope stirred within me, so I hurried to the village office to confirm the rumors. The village chief greeted me warmly and confirmed the news. "Yes, it's true. The paperwork's already been processed. We're just finalizing a few details before making the announcement. Don't worry, it'll happen soon. Kenichi knows about it too." I told him myself. The chief's words landed like a hammer blow. Kenichi had known. He must have known for months, yet he hadn't said a word. The reason for his return this time wasn't just the funeral. It was the evacuation compensation. A week later, the official eviction notice arrived. Kenichi, barely able to hide his excitement, came to discuss the compensation with me. His eagerness was apparent. And when I mentioned that the compensation would likely be enough to buy 3 properties, his expression shifted slightly, tightening for just a moment. Without hesitation, I said, "I don't need money, Kenichi. I want a house." I watched his reaction closely, adding, "You're already old. Money runs out quickly, but a house, that's security." I had thought long and hard about it. My plan was simple. Live in one house and rent out the other 2, ensuring a steady income for my remaining years. Kenichi, however, looked uncomfortable. He shrugged his shoulders and gave me a wry, almost forced smile. He then began talking about a project he was involved in, explaining how he needed funds for investment. Then, he asked if I could give him the compensation in cash instead of keeping the houses. His boldness surprised me, though I had half expected it. I couldn't help but feel hurt by his request. It was as if all the years of sacrifice, of love and devotion, had been reduced to this, a request for money. I looked at him, my heart heavy, and said, "Kenichi, your father and I raised you, no matter how difficult it was. We never let you suffer, thinking that one day, when you succeeded, we would feel that we could rely on you in our old age. But your father couldn't depend on you when it mattered most. Even at his funeral, your wife and children didn't come. Since then, I've been supported by others, not by you. And now, you come asking for money. Isn't that shameful?" Kenichi's eyes widened, shocked by my words. Yumi, overhearing, frowned deeply, grabbed our granddaughter, and stormed out of the room. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had finally voiced the pain that had been festering inside me for so long. My heart, once filled with warmth for my son, had grown cold, drained by years of his indifference. I had once believed that by living abroad, Kenichi had embraced new customs, but now I saw the truth. He had become selfish. Kenichi had distanced himself from us, justifying his actions with talk of freedom and human rights. But when he needed help, when he wanted something, he expected us to act like the traditional family he had abandoned. It wasn't his life abroad that had changed him. It was something far deeper, something broken inside. And in that moment, I regretted all the years I had spent focusing on his academic success, neglecting to nurture his heart. As Kenichi began explaining the project he was involved in, his words drifted to something more troubling. He was short on funds and needed financial help. Then, with a calmness that shocked me, he asked if I could lend him the compensation money in cash, rather than using it to secure a home as I had planned. Although I had mentally prepared myself for this moment, the sting of his request cut deeper than I had expected. I looked at him with a sadness I couldn't hide, and the words spilled out before I could stop them. I raised you, Kenichi. No matter how difficult it was for your father and me, we made sure you never suffered. We thought that if you succeeded, we could feel, knowing you were secure and that you might even be there for us in our old age. But your father couldn't rely on you, not even at the end. Your wife and children didn't even come to his funeral. My voice trembled, but I pressed on. Since then, it has been others who have supported me, not you. And now, you come asking for money as a family. Isn't that embarrassing? Kenichi's reaction was one of disbelief. His eyes widened in surprise, as though he hadn't expected me to stand up to him so firmly. Yumi, sitting nearby, frowned deeply, her face contorted with anger. She snatched up our granddaughter and stormed out of the room without a word. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't care about their reactions. I felt a sense of relief, a weight lifted from my chest after years of suppressing my true feelings. My heart had once been warm and full of hope for Kenichi, but his coldness over the years had drained that warmth away, leaving me with only a deep sense of regret. I had once believed that by moving abroad, Kenichi had embraced new ways of thinking and new customs that perhaps I didn't fully understand. But now I realized that it wasn't just a cultural shift. He had grown selfish and indifferent. He spoke of human rights and freedom, rejecting the values we had instilled in him. Yet, when he needed something, money, support, he expected us to fall back into the roles of the traditional parents who would always provide for their child. It wasn't his environment that had changed him. It was his very core. And in that moment, I deeply regretted the years I had spent focusing on his academic success, pushing him to achieve, without nurturing the values of compassion, humility, and gratitude. Somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of what mattered, and now I was facing the consequences of that oversight. In the wake of this confrontation, I made a decision. I would not depend on Kenichi, nor would I live in my relative's home indefinitely. After much thought and some effort, I moved into an elderly home. It wasn't a decision made out of despair, but rather one of acceptance. After my sister passed away, the elderly home became my new reality, and to my surprise, it wasn't as bad as I had feared. My relatives still visited me occasionally, and when I fell seriously ill, they took care of me. I was grateful for their support, but I also realized that I could manage on my own. I had a house, a pension, insurance, and the love and care of those who truly mattered. Life in the elderly home was simple, but there was a sense of peace in knowing that I hadn't given everything over to my unreliable son. It was far better to live modestly and independently than to hand over all my assets to someone who had proven time and again that he couldn't be trusted. In the end, I found comfort in the knowledge that I had secured my future without relying on Kenichi. Through my experience, I've come to realize something important. Even as parents, we shouldn't give too much unconditional love. While it's natural to want to provide for and protect our children, There's a fine line between love and enabling. If we give too much, too freely, without teaching them responsibility, we risk raising children who grow up self-centered, who take their parents for granted, and who believe it's their right to take from us without giving back. The bond between parent and child weakens, and in some cases, it severs entirely, leading to the loss of family happiness. Looking back, I wonder if this was always my fate. Maybe this was the inevitable ending for me, and I had simply failed to see the signs. Aging brings many fears, but the greatest one is loneliness. Yet time passes, and even in the absence of children, some people come and go in our lives, offering companionship and care. I've learned to find peace in that, and I'm trying my best to live my final days well, without relying on my son. So now I ask, what do you think should be done to prepare for old age? How can we strike a balance between loving our children and maintaining our dignity and independence as we grow older? What should you do to prepare for old age without relying on your children? To live independently and securely in old age without depending on your children, it's essential to take steps early on in several key areas: financial planning, health, social engagement, and preparing for end-of-life care. By planning in these areas, you can ensure that you maintain your dignity, independence, and well-being as you age. 1. Plan asset formation. Financial stability is at the core of preparing for old age. Start by estimating your post-retirement living expenses and create a plan to ensure that your pensions, savings, and investments will be sufficient to cover those costs. Relying solely on pensions may not be enough, so it's important to diversify your income streams. Consider investing in various assets like savings accounts, stocks, bonds, and real estate, which can provide you with a stable income over time. It's also crucial to review your insurance policies. Make sure you have appropriate medical insurance, life insurance, and long-term care insurance in place to help cover health-related expenses or other unexpected costs as you age. Securing your finances ahead of time will reduce the burden on yourself and your loved ones, and it will provide you with peace of mind knowing that your future is financially stable. 2. Creating a comfortable living environment. Where and how you live in old age can greatly affect your quality of life. If you own your home, consider making modifications that cater to your needs as you grow older, such as installing grab bars in the bathroom, removing tripping hazards, or even moving to a single-story home if mobility becomes an issue. If you rent, consider long-term leases in environments that will allow you to live peacefully as you age. Additionally, elderly-friendly housing or serviced apartments with support services tailored to older adults can be viable options if you wish to live independently, but may need assistance in the future. Planning your living situation carefully will ensure you have a comfortable, safe, and suitable home. 3. Maintaining physical and mental health. Your health is your most valuable asset in old age. A balanced diet, regular exercise, and routine health checkups are essential to maintaining physical well-being. Preventive care can help you avoid many health problems that come with aging. Equally important is taking care of your mental and emotional health. Engage in community activities. Maintain close relationships with friends, neighbors, and family, and pursue hobbies that bring you joy. These social interactions and emotional connections can help prevent loneliness, which is often a major challenge for older adults. Being part of a supportive community fosters a sense of belonging and mental well-being. 4. Planning for care and final wishes. It's never too early to discuss your care preferences and end-of-life plans with your family. This can include everything from medical treatments to your preferences for living arrangements should you need long-term care. Preparing a legal will and creating a document outlining your wishes can ensure that your decisions are respected in case you become unable to communicate them. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment below to let me know that you are still here with me. By having these discussions early on, you'll not only make things easier for your family, but you'll also retain control over your care and assets. Addressing these matters proactively can prevent future family disputes and ensure that your affairs are handled smoothly. 5. Embracing a meaningful lifestyle. One of the keys to a fulfilling retirement is finding purpose in your daily life. Whether you continue with hobbies you've always enjoyed or explore new ones, keeping your mind and body active will give you a sense of purpose and vitality. Consider trying new activities like volunteering, learning a new language, traveling, cooking, or even taking online courses. The goal is to stay engaged, mentally stimulated, and connected to the world around you. Your post-retirement years can be some of the most rewarding if you focus on personal growth, curiosity, and activities that bring you joy. By embracing new challenges and enriching experiences, you can live a fulfilling and happy life even without relying on your children. 6. Communicating with family. While it's important to prepare for independence, keeping an open line of communication with your family is still vital. Share your plans and desires with your loved ones so that they understand your wishes and know how to support you when needed. However, it's important not to place excessive expectations on your children. Instead, design your life around your independence, but keep your family close for emotional support and in case of emergencies. Expressing gratitude and maintaining good relationships with your family and close friends can lead to a more stable and emotionally fulfilling old age. By fostering these relationships, you ensure that while you may not rely on your children for financial or physical care, the emotional bonds remain strong. As we wrap up, it's clear that preparing for old age without relying on your children requires thoughtful planning across various aspects of life, financial, health, and emotional well-being. So, what have you learned so far? We'd love to hear from you. Comment below and share one thing you've learned from this video that you plan to bring into practice in your own life. If you found this video helpful, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts.